future looks like for these kind of membership-based organizations running awards, grants, scholarships, etc., and kind of this transition in this online ecosystem that we're really going through right now. I think it's an exciting time, but it's also one that is going to really kind of test us here with ways of managing some of these kind of upcoming challenges that weren't present 2 years ago. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started here with some quick introductions and the goal behind today's webinar topic. So as you can see here, the main goal today is to kind of look at how chambers of commerce, as well as really just any membership-based organization that's doing member recognition awards, scholarships, grants, leadership programs, any of these highly competitive application submission review type programs are starting to leverage AI for both the good and the bad. So on our end, again, we'll get into some introductions, but what I call intelligent automation. So how do we kind of leverage AI to both streamline operations from an organizational perspective, but then equally important, if not more important, is how do we elevate the experience and really provide a personalized experience for applicants, nominators, submitters, volunteers, board members, community members, everybody involved. The second thing that we'll touch on, which is going to be the main point of contact here today, is going to be leveraging AI in both plagiarism detection. So as you can imagine, with the rise of tools like ChatGPT, which we'll get into here in a second, an overwhelming number of applicants to these programs. And when I mean these programs, I mean broadly speaking, your leadership programs, your scholarships, your awards, a large percent are actually using tools like ChatGPT to write content for them. So how do we at least flag that for your awareness so you can make kind of data-driven decisions off of it? And the last thing that we're going to talk about is kind of lumped together, which is going to be making your lives a bit easier, but more importantly is how do we kind of build this review selection process that's fair, non-biased, and compliant, that gives the applicants the fair shot that they deserve, while also being very, very sensitive to the volunteer time of your volunteer. So with that said, really quick introduction of who I am and what we do here at Reviewr and kind of why we're qualified to talk about this. So, my name is Kyle. I'm the CEO here at Reviewr. I've been fortunate now to be doing this now for 12 different years. And I think the best part about my job is we work with so many membership-based associations, specifically chambers of commerce. I mean, everything from the U.S. Chamber and the U.S. Chamber Foundation, the Grand Rapids Chamber, the City of Austin, Texas Chamber, right? Everybody in between. And we've seen so many powerful and unique workflows. Again, leadership programs, grants, awards, scholarships, conferences, and everything in between. And over a decade now of experience, not only have we built in a very powerful platform that's intended to run these workflows and these life cycles from literally start to finish, but it's people like yourselves that bring to us very unique challenges or things that they're seeing within the ecosystem that they're either A, looking for assistance with, or B, hoping that we can leverage our deep portfolio of other organizations and kind of shed light on some of these different types of topics and bring awareness to best practices. And that's really what brings us full circle here today. So again, doing this now with well over 1,000 organizations every single year, from academia to associations to chambers, is one of the hot topics over the last probably 12 to 18 months. If you want to get very specific, we're talking about November of when ChatGPT of 2022 was released, is how AI is now starting to play a pivotal role into how applicants are creating submission forms, but then also how you and your staff can start to streamline operations and build these highly customized and personalized experiences for your stakeholders and for your applicants. So at a high level, it's kind of where our background looks like and where we came from. With that said, let's actually dive now into what we want to talk about today. I will be toggling back and forth as well between kind of a high level framework of discussion points, but then also Reviewr, not necessarily to showcase the platform, but more importantly, to kind of show in real time kind of how these concepts are being utilized by other organizations. That way you can either take them and apply it to your programs, etc. You're also going to notice off to the bottom right, there is a QR code. So if anybody is interested in signing up for what I call Sidekick, it's going to be Reviewr's first kind of AI detection tool that you can leverage for your programs. It's going to be the industry first tool that's utilizing it. You can join the waitlist. It'll actually lock you into a current Reviewr pricing structures before things change in the coming months. So with that said, I want to touch on kind of where I personally feel like we're currently sitting within this ecosystem, both kind of where the industry sits, but then also where Reviewr specifically is positioned. So I mentioned beforehand that I have a strong hunch, and there's data that backs me up that says, 56% of applicants for scholarship programs specifically, and that was back in November of 23, so 6 months ago, were leveraging either ChatGPT or AI tools to literally write their essay content for them verbatim from start to finish, or they're leveraging external tools to plagiarize content from start to finish, right? So if we're talking about nearly 60% 6 months ago, I guarantee you that number is well north of 70 to 75% at this point in time. And like many of us, I think we're all utilizing these types of tools like Claude and Chat GPT within our daily lives and work, which typically then means it's starting to bleed into other types of programs that really have in-depth data collection. So I know for a fact it's happening with award programs, so nomination forms, reference letters. It's happening in the grant making space. It's happening kind of for conference call for speakers, things like that. So right now, I feel like that's kind of at the tip of the iceberg of how people are leveraging AI for these campaigns, right? Is to just generate content on their behalf. Now, when I say that, do I think that they're 100% just copy and pasting it over? Yeah, I think a large percent probably are. I do think, though, that there's another large percentage that will leverage AI to help create the framework of a well thought out nomination or a well thought out submission form, and then start to customize it from there. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but how do you, as an operations team, start to delineate and identify the difference between those two? On top of that, though, I think that there's also where Reviewr currently sits, and these are kind of where I mentioned Sidekick, our tool, is starting to address, which is two parts. One is operational efficiency, right? You're a mission-driven organization. There are so many daily activities that you should be doing that drives your organizations further than pulling in spreadsheets and emailing and downloading documents. How do we leverage tools to streamline that? But then also, like I mentioned before, is how do we combat kind of that elephant in the room, which is people who are writing content with AI assistance, right? So how do we flag it for you, kind of let you know, hey, on a scale of like 1 to 10, how confident are we? And in fact, like what content was flagged, so you can start to do some of your own investigations on top of that. So that's where we currently sit. So we're kind of ahead of the game a little bit. With that said, where do I think we're going? I personally feel like any of these submission-based decision-making programs are going to go full autonomous at some point. I literally mean that at some point in time, people apply to your awards or to your scholarships or to your leadership programs, and then there's going to be technology that will just kick out the results in real time automatically with no human interaction. That's an extreme example, but I don't have any reason to believe that we won't get there. Do I think it's going to happen overnight? Absolutely not. Is it going to happen in the next couple of years? No, absolutely not. And there's a lot of reasons why I don't think that's going to happen, nor do I think it should happen that quickly. Because anytime we start to leverage AI to make human driven decision making, we're leveraging historical data. And we'll get now into this at the end of today's topic. But anytime we have these review and selection processes that historically have been biased, and I know for a fact that there's review committees that have taken into consideration personal biases, demographic backgrounds, and that has kind of clouded their decision making, that we cannot leverage that to make decisions. So we're still a ways out from getting there, but I want us to kind of think bigger picture, like where we're going. And the reason why I outlined this kind of as a winding road is that it's going to be very windy. We're going to take a few steps back and we're going to go on this journey together. That's kind of my obligation to you and your teams, is that we're going to keep our ear on the ground, listening to what's happening within the space and innovating along the way. So where do we kind of start with? This is an actual example, kind of in 30 seconds, we can see in real time how easy it is. So this is a scholarship program that has 6 different essay prompts. Again, this could be award programs with nomination forms. It could be nomination acceptances. It could be leadership programs. Where we literally have people writing into Chat GPT, act as if you are this type of person, answering this type of question in this many characters or less with this tonality, and they're copying and pasting that content over. And if you read through this, one of the questions is like, as a leader, describe a book that describes your leadership traits, and talks about The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. And if you read through these answers, like they're so well put together that I don't think I personally would have any way of knowing if it was written by AI or not. And because it's so well written, there's a strong likelihood that that application rises the ranks. And now we start to get into like obviously the fairness component of like, okay, great. How do we now take what was historically a way for individuals to let their personality shine through, and now turn into a game of cat and mouse of really what's real and authentic and what's not? So let's keep this in the back of our mind. We'll come back to this. I do want to first touch on, though, things like intelligent automation, because by no means do I feel like AI is a bad thing. In fact, I do want to actually promote it. And so as we kind of get in here, like there are a lot of tools and ways that we can allow applicants to leverage AI to write better content, and we should empower them to do so. We just have to be aware of what's happening. So when we get into things like intelligent automation, I'm very specifically talking about the applicant experience. Again, we'll come back to some of the review selection processes and the operation side of things. But as an applicant, we know for a fact that they're going to use AI. So why don't we set them up for success and make these types of tools available to all, right? So that we can kind of lower the barrier and increase application rates. So number one recommendation using intelligent application automation is going to be recommendation tools. There are so many award programs and scholarships that are being provided that either A, the nominees or the applicants or the candidates have no idea what they're even eligible for. There's a scholarship program that we work with that does 96 different scholarships. Each one of them is so hyper specific in the eligibility and the rules and the criteria that their scholarships are actually going unfunded. There are deserving applicants that have no idea what they could apply for, and there's money waiting for them. So, how do we leverage intelligent automation to kind of pair them up with opportunities that match their best interests? On the flip side of that, when it comes to like award programs and nominations, how do we start to kind of read in real time an applicant's kind of what I call applicant persona and align them with whatever award categories suit them the best? It could be more related to your mission. It could be more related to their background, but how do we create this like personalized experience? Going more into like the personalized experience side of things, I think gone are the days of providing these like online submission processes, or hopefully not paper based, where everybody fills out the exact same thing. Because as we create these applicant personas, now we know who they are. We're starting to build like a match of their personality. We have their content. So from there on out, we can start to collect hyper specific questions that relate to their profile. So award categories, each one can have different questions being asked. Maybe you want to leverage a dual process, which I'm a big proponent of when it comes to award programs, or you have nominators that come in and fill out a high level nomination form. Nominees then come in, they fill out their portion. And then maybe there's references that fill out their portion, and then using intelligent automation, kind of looping it all and tying it back together. So it allows us to collect very hyper-specific, relevant information from the applicant. The best way to think about this is if you remember those Goosebumps books where you kind of choose your own journey based on what page you're on and kind of how you want to go. That's how I treat these programs, where applicants come in, they start to interact with the processes. Again, leadership programs, scholarships, awards, and then based on how they interact with it, it kind of decides their fate of the future subsequent questions and pages that they're going to start to get to. Now, on top of that, we can also start to do some eligibility screening and qualifications, both on your behalf, but also from the applicant's perspective. Because one thing I don't want to see happen is people put in a lot of time and energy filling out these submission processes just to find out months later that they weren't even eligible. So they wasted a ton of time for an opportunity that they had no chance at. On the flip side, you and your team might be spending a significant amount of time as well sifting and sorting through these applications and marking people as either yay or nays when the system could in real time say, hey, based off of their profile, they're not eligible, or maybe we can make recommendations on what they are eligible for. So there's that component to things. We're going to come back to an example here in just a second. The other thing I want to look at here is going to be enhanced content creation. So I mentioned a little bit ago that the applicants 100% are going to seek assistance tools like ChatGPT. So if that is the case, why don't we tee them up for success by making those tools available to them in a very confined environment that you can kind of control the experience? So what I mean by that is that we want to empower them to create the best version of themselves and their best applications, but we don't want them to create duplications or steal other people's work or have it written for them. So for example, how I would leverage these tools is to build ideation generation. So if it's a nomination form, and maybe one of the questions is like describe like the 3 characteristics that make you a strong fit for this year's program, they could put in again with like a dedicated prompt, that type of questionnaire, and then the system would say talk about these 3 bullet points, and then the applicant would then jump in there and start to create their own custom response, but the framework is put in place for them. It also allows you to leverage things like spell check, grammar, structure, right? We're basically just elevating the content that they're already putting in there to get the best quality candidates out of these programs. With that said, it very much depends on the demographic of your applicant. So I'm going to use an example here where there might be an organization we work with within your network, actually, that has thousands and thousands of individuals ages 6th grade through 8th grade, and they're writing essays. And one of the challenges is that not only can we identify like who's had AI written for them, whose parents wrote it for them, and how many of those individuals had access to tools like ChatGPT versus those that didn't, right? They didn't have the same support system. And so inherently the content they're going to be submitting is lower. So how do we even the playing field as well as boost the volume of applicants for all of these campaigns? And then the last thing I want to talk about is if you're doing a leadership program or a scholarship, There's a lot of interviewing that's now happening within these programs for two reasons. One is it's a great way to allow the applicant's personality to shine through. Number two is that's how you can clearly eliminate AI, right? Because now you're talking one-to-one with a real human. With that said, it goes back to like evening the playing field where not everybody has the same support system, right? So somebody may not be able to practice for 6 hours with their peers for an upcoming interview. So how do we leverage these different types of tools to actually feed them interview questions? They can respond back. And then based on the responses, the follow-up interview questions, right, are adaptive and it builds off of the responses. So we're actually allowing that applicant to practice in real time what that experience may look like. So with that said, I am keeping this chat open. So if anybody has any questions, comments, or how you're doing these things right now, please do throw it in there. The goal here is to create a very interactive kind of conversation today. But let's take a look at what this in theory could look like. So I mentioned beforehand creating a customized or personalized experience. So using awards as an example, in this example, we're kind of showing how we can duplicate and break out this process into two dedicated parallels. So the nomination portion. So again, the goal of a nomination is to A, increase volume, and B, lower the barrier for people submitting. So a lot of use cases here where most chambers will ask questions like, hey, who are you? Who are you nominating? And why are you nominating that person? And that's it, right? There's no more content being selected. So we have all these applications that are coming in all these nominations. And then from there, we can start to use real-time, again, intelligent automation to trigger notifications out to the nominee that says, hey, Kyle, you've been nominated for this year's, Austin A-list or this year's 40 under 40 awards. Click here to fill out your nomination packet. Now they join Reviewr in their own kind of personalized experience, and they're going to upload and kind of add content about themselves that the app or the nominee didn't have to worry about. Because again, who knows more about themselves than that individual? So we should leverage them to submit to you guys up-to-date personal information, jobs, resumes, all the content you're collecting should come directly from the source. But again, you can't ask a nominator to do this because the volume is going to drop dramatically because they're not going to put in the time to do that, right? So the idea here is that nominations come in, notifies nominees, they then come in, and then the next piece of this intelligent automation puzzle is going to be the program or opportunity recommendation tool. Now, for those of you doing different types of leadership programs or scholarships, this parallels really well. So for example, the applicant may fill out a series of questions and, based off of these results, the system might say, hey, this is what you're eligible for, or this is what you're not eligible for. So kind of putting that into practice, the system actually said, hey, based off of your applicant persona, these are the three different kind of categories that you can apply for. Which of or all of do you want to submit for? And then from there, we're going to customize this experience even more. So for example, another use case here might be saying, hey, you know what? Based on what you submitted to us, you're not actually eligible. So don't waste your time. We're trying to be sensitive to that. But then from your team's perspective, right, we're already kind of automatically vetting people before they get into your pipeline. So then from there on, I do remember we actually selected the Lennox Wilder Award. So now the applicant proceeds on, and we're actually serving up custom questions that are very specific to how they interacted with the forms on subsequent pages, right? So again, this is the personalized experience that I'm talking about. Kind of moving on, the last thing I want to talk about here is kind of the consolidation of data. So it's very common in all of these campaigns to leverage external resources like references. This is another webinar topic, but please, please, please stop doing reference letters. Reference letters are a reflection of the person writing the reference, not the candidate that they're writing the reference for. Instead, we think you should transition to reference templates. So like, what are the 3 to 4 things that you want every reference to talk about? That way your data is very, very consistent from all of your applicants, and it lowers the barrier for the person writing the reference. They're now answering a series of questions versus filling something out from scratch. So how do you power that using intelligent automation? So again, this could be transcripts, references, external submission forms, but the applicant can put in simply who that person is. It triggers a notification, in this case to Tony, saying, hey, Tony, you've been asked to write a reference on this year's 40 under 40 awards for Kyle. Click here to do so. It then sends Tony to a reference template, not a reference upload. They then fill it out, and then using intelligent automation, it'll tie itself back to my application profile. So what does that look like? You can see you have this kind of list of all the nominations that I had submitted for me or all my references. I can then click on it, and you'll notice that within Reviewr, it'll embed those deliverables right in our system. So we kind of consolidate everything into one centralized hub. Same thing goes with file uploads, right? So if you're collecting a wide variety of different types of files, the system will actually send the files to a dedicated page. You can view them embedded directly in Reviewr. So again, any comments or questions, toss them into the chat. The next thing I want to look at, and this is kind of where I'm excited to introduce an upcoming feature here that's going to happen probably in the next maybe month and a half, called Sidekick, right? And so Sidekick is going to be our first introduction to providing you guys very dedicated AI and plagiarism detection tools to combat this example that we looked at the very beginning of this call. So if you remember, we have in real time here an example of somebody copying and pasting question prompts into Chat GPT and then sending it back into their submission form. So how do you combat this? The idea behind AI content and plagiarism detection is not necessarily to make decisions for you. We just want to flag individuals that may have utilized those tools. And it's a double-edged sword because if we leverage these types of intelligent automation tools that gives applicants like AI tools to create the framework of their applications or do spell check or do grammar checks, we are likely setting them up to get flagged. Let me repeat that. If we're giving them AI tools to write better content, we are now also going to flag them for utilizing AI. That's okay. So the idea here is to try to figure out like how much utilization is okay and how do we want to deal with it. So ultimately, we're dealing with kind of two parallels. One's going to be short form essay, text-based questions. The other is going to be things like file uploads, which might be more relevant to like plagiarism. But the goal here, and this is questions that you need to ask yourselves internally and or like how do you want us to assist you, is like how are we checking for people? So I think there's going to be two common trends. Number one is that people will use it on the front end to kind of help narrow down a large applicant pool to a smaller volume. We're going to get more into how we can use AI to do that as well. But if we can basically say, hey, like we had 10% of people that wrote their applications from start to finish 100% automated, let's just eliminate them now so that lowers down the eligibility pool. I do think the majority of people won't do that. They instead will kind of go through the process and then they're going to do a quick check for like the finalists or the recipients just to verify. And then if they catch somebody from there, they can do further investigation or replace them with like an honorable mention, right? Or somebody on the wait list. So I think the goal for you should be basically, okay, look, we have all these applications that come in. Let's run our check. Let's figure out what's going on. So do we have, on average, people do 20% AI writing? That's okay. That's kind of your threshold. Anybody lower than 20% proceeds on. Anybody higher than 20% maybe requires us to spend a bit more time looking at. So if that is the case, how are you going to do that? So this is, again, kind of what brings us full circle to Sidekick. So the way the Sidekick works is that you basically get this menu system and it'll show you a listing of every one of the applicants that you've received. And then you basically get two different scores, or you can even do a combination of both. And it shows you both the AI detection score and the plagiarism score. And it's on a 1 to 100% scale. So how confident are we, as well as what percent of their content was written with the assistance of those tools? So for some of these, they have 0%. That's great. They didn't do anything. For others, say, for example, down here, they had 70% detection. Okay, that's a flag. You should probably look into that more. So what I would typically recommend is let's just kind of figure like what's our baseline? Like what's the average percent on both of these columns? And then we can start to jump up here and we can create these filters and we can say, okay, well, show me anybody over or under that baseline so we can kind of investigate them further. So to do so, you just simply open up their application form. Again, with Reviewr, this is where you actually bring you into like their actual bios of their application packets. But very specifically, it's going to bring you to the questions that we flagged. And so for every question that was checked, you get both an AI score and then a plagiarism score. And then from here, you can actually open up, say, for example, the AI score, and it'll show you exactly what content was flagged, if it was human content or if it's AI content, as well as for the plagiarism score, it'll also show you exactly which content was plagiarized. It'll show you if it was a 100% perfect match, if it was paraphrased, or if there was human kind of involvement to modify it. And then also, where was the source? Because again, if it was plagiarized, we know it had to come from somewhere. So we can actually see in real time what that source was. Again, by no means are we making decisions for you. We're giving you the data that you need to make informed decisions yourself. Similar goes, we're actually going to give you a very dedicated user interface that shows you on a per question basis what we're checking, the individual AI scores for each one of them, as well as the plagiarism scores. And again, you can open up the question specifically, and then it'll kick out the results of what was flagged. So again, questions or comments, please toss them in the chat. But Again, Reviewr is powering everything from the intelligent automation, but then in this use case, the detection scores for you to make those decisions. So the next thing I want to talk about, and this is the last kind of conversation, which is going to be a two-part thing. It's going to be streamlining operations for your team, but then also is how do we create this kind of non-biased review and selection workflow that removes biases and stays very, very compliant, because I'm about to throw a wrench into your processes here. So number one is there's kind of a couple different things that I would do using hopefully Reviewr, but AI to streamline your operations. So number one is that I would consider potentially summarizing application content. This is going to be very specific on how many applicants you receive, how many reviews of workflows that you have, as well as how many staff members you have assisting with the review process. Let's make up a crazy number. If you have 1,000 submissions that you have 5 people reading through, why don't we instead start to summarize those applications and build a short synopsis of the candidate that you can then use for a kind of a quick thumbs up, thumbs down. And then from there, you take all the thumbs up with an actual more thorough judging review selection process. So again, taking long form content from a lot of people and then starting to consolidate into a much more manageable and meaningful number. The other thing I would do is I would start to leverage these tools to create kind of structure. So what I mean by that is if it's an award program with maybe 6 different award categories, why don't we start to leverage intelligent automation to read the forms and say, okay, well, let's put everybody who chose the 40 under 40 award into this category. Anybody who chose, Startup of the Year award into this category. You can start to build in real time themes around applications. It can be location based, but you're basically in real time reading the applicants' profiles and then drop them into what I call buckets that kind of match a preset defined characteristics for sorting purposes, but also more importantly is that third bucket, which is going to be pairing them up with your review team. So when you go to pair up your collected applications with your selection teams, there's a couple ways of doing that because we have content, right? We have the applicant persona as well as the review persona. We can maybe pair them up based off of expertise, right? So there's very specific criteria that you want certain reviewers to have, then you can start to pair them up. You can also, and this is where I mentioned throwing a wrench into the process, you can also do things like random distribution. This is more common with scholarships, but it is very common with awards as well, where we want to redact data from the review team's point of view. We don't want them to be able to see any personal identifying information or any type of content that might cloudy their judging processes. But then also random distribution. Going back to my example earlier on, if you have 500 submissions and a 10-person review team, you physically can't have your team looking at all 500 applications. Like there's just no physical way they can do that. So why don't you leverage these intelligent automation that will auto assign out to your team, no more than 10 submissions, or flip it up and say, hey, let's ensure that every applicant gets looked at exactly 6 times by 6 different people at random. So let's look at that. But I also want to throw this wrench in there. And that's the normalization of results. So for anybody on the call, whether or not you're going to use Reviewr or not, if you do random distribution of submissions to review teams, this implies that every applicant will be reviewed by different people. So if you're familiar with the show Shark Tank on ABC, there's Mr. Wonderful, and he's notorious for being a bit hard on applicants, right? He judges people much more stingy than, say, for example, Lori or Barbara. So any applicant that gets scored by Mr. Wonderful, and if you're using totals or averages, inherently will be lower in your ranking than anybody scored by Barbara. Is that fair? Absolutely not. Because if your score sheet is on a scale from 1 to 30 and Barbara's giving out 28s and 29s left and right, but Mr. Wonderful never gives out more than a 15 and you just got a 14, that's actually tremendous. You got Mr. Wonderful's best score. You should not be penalized for that. So how do we leverage, hopefully in this case, Reviewr and AI to identify that? And we'll look at this. So kind of moving on here, in real time, we can now look at what this looks like from your operations side of things. So I mentioned kind of creating these buckets to pair up all of your submissions with your team for selection processes, as well as randomization. So in Reviewr, you can actually load up your review committees. And then again, in doing so, you can create these applicant personas, and you can maybe tie them within the import to who they should be reviewing. Going back to that bucket concept, this is an example potentially of a chamber that's doing a lot of different types of programs, grants, scholarships, awards, board nominations, right? Leadership programs. And so the idea is that everybody kind of goes into one centralized submission process, and then they get funneled into whatever kind of bucket they belong to. So some people might go to the 40 under 40 awards. Some people might go to the annual board nominations, right? And again, we're creating this custom personalized experience for collecting information relevant to them. And then it drops them into whatever their corresponding corresponding buckets are. Each one has different dates and deadlines, different review committees, different score sheets, right? Very, very independent of one another. But the idea behind this, again, we can take the Linux Wilder Award, is that there was intelligent automation that found all the Linux Wilder applicants, put them into that bucket. Now we then give that bucket to a team. So whenever Simon, Paula, and Mark come into Reviewr, they're only going to have access to the candidates in the bucket that you gave them access to. Now let's go deeper. If I open this bucket up, it's actually going to show us what's going on. So it shows you a listing of all of your applicants, how many people are reviewing it, and then who those individuals are. Now, vice versa, you can look at all of your reviewers, how many applicants they're reviewing, and who those applicants are. So going back to my example earlier on, I could actually bulk select everybody and say, hey, let's just give every applicant to 5 people. Or on the review side, I could say, hey, let's just give each one no more than 6, but no less than 4. And then obviously using the intelligent automation, the system will kind of read the volume and figure out like what numbers match up. And then it'll auto distribute these submissions off to your staff at random, as well as redact any personal identifying information, demographic details, etc., to avoid clouding their review. So great, we went ahead and did that. You can override the results. There's conflict of interest tools that are baked into it. But ultimately, the review committees then come into the platform and they get a menu, which is going to be a listing of all of the candidates that you want them to evaluate. Again, you can redact the data. This might be scholarship applicants, it might be award nominations, it might be board members who are applying for board seats, right? All sorts of use cases. But the idea is that the review committee can open them up, and then we start to eliminate any personal interactions that they might have, because we don't want any manual tabulations of results or any manipulating of data. So the goal here is to side by side, the review team can see the content that was submitted by the applicant. And then off to the right, they can fill out these score sheets. Now, again, the selection tools should not leverage like 1 through 5s or 1 through 10s, because anytime a review member is using point values, they start to get confused. Like, what's the difference between a 7 and an 8 or a 6 and 7? So instead, using kind of these intelligent tools, we can ask them to answer these questions off of like text prompts. So like, how do you feel about this applicant's achievements from good to great? And then behind the scenes, you can start to tie point values to it to help you make data-driven decisions. But the goal here is that your team can kind of side by side answer the questions, and then the system will actually kick out a leaderboard for you using automation. And it shows you on a per award or a per scholarship or a per program basis, all the applicants, who reviewed it, total scores and averages. Now, right away, we have a problem. So I can see right here that we have Paula that gave a 19 and Judge Judy that gave a 31. So now do we know, like, okay, did Paula really score this low, or is 19 the best score that Paula ever gave? So that's where the normalization comes into play. And so this is an example to kind of showcase how it gets utilized. But basically, it shows you a listing of all of your applicants and then a per score sheet question per judge, how each of them scored. And what ends up happening is they go through the scoring process, you're collecting all this data, you get what I call a normalized display. And so you can see on a per judge basis, their individual averages. So I already kind of wrote this out for us, where I have, let's just call this Paul. Paul on average gives out a score of a 33 or a 23, but Tony over here gives out on average a 34. Like, that's a huge difference. Like, that judge on average gives 10 points higher than Paul. So anybody that Paul reviews is going to have a lower ranking than anybody Tony reviews. Like, that cannot happen. So what we do at this point is then we start to compare each of the individual scores against their own averages. So anybody that Paul scored as a 23 is now a 1, because that's average, right? Anything that Paul scores over 23 is now like a 1.15. Anything under 23, so for example, this 19 might be a 0.92. So what we then do is we take everybody's normalized individual results, and you get this centered score. So in this example, this applicant got scored 1.15 times higher than average. This person was 0.9 times lower than average. And that's what we're using to kind of go through the decision-making matrix. So, with that said, if you have any questions, please do let me know. I really appreciate your participation today, and keep an eye out for that follow-up. Have a good one.